Hello friends, welcome back. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm in Luminar Neo, and in this video I'll be sharing a couple of tips that I use for editing skies to really make them pop, make the colors look awesome. And these are tips that I don't really ever talk about. I don't believe I've really even shared this before. We're going to dive into that. The great thing is it's super simple, super easy. You'll pick it up like that because it's that easy. We're going to go ahead and jump into it. So I've got a photo here from my recent adventure to Colorado. That's how it started, that's how it currently is, and as you can see here, I'm on the Edits tab. All I've done is a little bit of light work in Develop Raw. So before and after, slightly brighten the photo is basically what it comes down to. Now, this is a photo that I think is a great example of where I want to be very specific and selective in controlling the light and color. If you look at it, this is a photo that has what I call color tension. There's a lot of bright stuff on the right hand side of the sky. On the left hand, I should say bright and warm. On the left hand, there's a little bit darker, more shadowed stuff that's also cooler. So I get that color and light tension, bright and warm, cooler and darker. And I love that, and I love playing that up in photos, and I talk about color tension in some of the videos. And so I want to play with that because it's occurred naturally and I want to accentuate it. So normally after Develop Raw, I go into super contrast, and that's what I'm going to do today. Normally what I do is I move these about a 25 or so just to see what happens. And in doing so, you know, if you look at the before and after, it's having a nice impact on the sky, except over here, like it feels like it's kind of, I'm losing some of the texture, and it's kind of blowing out a little bit over there. So I'm going to undo that. And I ended up being a bit more selective. I go to about a 12 here. Of course, the numbers are kind of immaterial because you don't have this photo, but I end up playing around and I ended up something about like that. So a pretty gentle implementation. If you look at the before and after, it basically slightly darkened the highlights. And then I go into midtones and I ended up going really light here, like a 3. And then on the balance, like a 28 or 29. And if you look at that before and after, it's great because it's adding a little bit of contrast. That's obviously what super contrast does. And the reason I talk about and use super contrast so much is because it's very selective. It has the various tonal areas, highlights, midtones, and shadows. It separates them, gives you that control, which I love. But it often isn't exactly what I need, and this video is going to be a prime example of that. I did move the shadows. I did like a 25 and like a 14 here. Again, the numbers are pretty immaterial, but if you look at the overall before and after, it's pretty subtle before and after. So I like what I've done, and I like where I am so far. Overall, before and after, right? Before and after. But I feel like I'm losing a little bit still here in these warm tones, and I don't have near enough kind of impact over here in this area because, again, I want to play up that color tension. Oops, I didn't mean to zoom in. And I want to play up kind of the differences between them. And so here's a tip that I like to use. I don't really think I ever talk about with skies, and that is you may go, because there's things like sky masks and object masks, you might want to say, oh, I want to do some develop, and I want to do sky contrast and then go into masking and like get a sky or something, but I don't like to do that. It's not selective enough, and it doesn't give you enough control because it grabs the whole sky. Well, the thing is, there's two parts of the sky, and so if you look at it, for me, it kind of divides. There's this section here, which really needs some emphasis, and then there's the rest of the sky, which needs a little bit of work as well. And so what I want to do is I'm going to focus on those individually with different masks, not a sky mask or object mask, because that grabs the whole thing, and not even a luminosity mask, which is, I bet, where you thought I was going, because I do love my luminosity mask, and I am going to use one in this video. But for this initial emphasis on contrast, I'm actually going to start with a radial mask. So I'm going to start by doing about a 50 or so, low 50s, 54, 55. And if you look at just this section over here, the before and after, that contrast is popping. It pops the light, but it also pops the color. So I'm going to go and get a mask, and it's going to be a radial gradient, and I just want to put it in this area. And so that's the tip here, is think about and look at your photo. Even if it's the sky, which you think of as one thing, it can be multiple things because there's different things going on in different parts of the sky. I'm going to take this radial and I'm going to make it kind of broad and I'm going to position it maybe about like that, maybe a little bit broader. Every photo is different, of course, but now if you look at the before and after, right? Before and after, it's giving a nice little pop to the clouds, and I faded that into the top of these mountains, so I'm getting a little bit of nice pop there too, before and after. So that's the first tip, is consider using a radial mask or radial gradient to pop certain areas, because I didn't do anything to color. You can see color here, it's all still at 0, but if you look at the colors before and after, because of that pop in contrast, which is light, the difference between the dark stuff and the bright stuff makes those colors pop. And I've now got a really, I think, beautiful section of sky right there. But of course, we're not done, because there's another section of sky. So I'm going to go back into develop, and this time I'm going to get a linear gradient, and I'm going to take it, and there's a nice kind of division line right in here between what we did before and what we haven't done yet. And so I'm going to get this linear gradient, and I'm going to give myself a nice fade into those other areas, maybe something about like that. And this time I'm going to make a bit more substantial changes, because there's more work that needs to happen here. I actually reduced the contrast and slightly pulled down the highlights. And all I'm trying to do is pull back a little bit of the brightness in some of these areas. I'm actually going to lift the shadows a little bit, which is going to, of course, increase the brightness in the darker parts. But if you look at the before and after, the blues are getting a little bit darker. And I didn't even drop the exposure. I just dropped the highlights and things like that. But I am going to play a little bit with color. And because there's so much warmth there already, I'm actually going to go negative on the temperature, and I'm going to add a little bit of tint. And the other thing I want to do is slightly pull down the saturation. So I'm going to go negative, because these oranges are kind of bright and intense, and I don't want to just really crank them up, for lack of a better term. So if you look at the before and after in that section of the sky, you'll also notice, because of the way the gradient fades in here, I'm getting a little bit more control over those oranges. So before, it looks a little bit more blown out to me, and you lose some of the natural texture in those clouds. That's before. And after, I'm getting some of that back, and I like that quite a bit. So having done those two things with a radial gradient and then a linear gradient, and kind of visually, and then of course with masks separating the different components of the sky, I'm getting a lot more control. In fact, way more control than I'd ever get with actually a luminosity mask, or more commonly with like mask AI selecting the sky, or object mask selecting the sky. Because I fragmented, or partitioned is probably the best word. I kind of partitioned that sky into two areas that I wanted to separately edit. So that's the major two things I'm doing. Now the other thing I like to do is come in with Accent AI and give it a nice pop, and that looks pretty good, but it's a little too intense in the sky, and I don't really need it in the foreground. This is where I come in with a luminosity mask, which I love and I talk about all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and get this luminosity mask, and I'm going to compress that into the kind of mid-tone areas with a nice generous fade into the shadows and some of the highlights. And so maybe something about like that. Maybe I don't need that much of a fade, but something about like that. I've given the majority of this Accent AI into the midtones, right, which is right there. That gets 100%. And then it fades into some of the shadows and fades into some of the highlights. What I'm not doing is impacting this bright part of the sky down here and down there where it's blue, and the tippity top, if you will, of those clouds. I'm not really impacting that either, and I could pull that back a little bit more, because I like that white and I like how it stands out. And now if you look at my before and after for Accent AI, contained in that area, before and after gives that extra little oomph at the end where you get a little bit more contrast, a little bit more pop in color, because Accent AI does a lot, but you're not in there messing with colors and saturation and luminance and all that. You're taking care of a lot of that with Accent AI with the luminosity mask, containing it in just specific tonal areas. But then perhaps more importantly are the two moves I did in the beginning, radial gradient, linear gradient, to control the two different sort of sections or partitions of the sky. And overall, that gives me a massive amount of control over this image, but also the sky primarily, which is what I'm focused on. So before and after, nice pop of color, nice change in light, before and after. So something to think about when you're editing, and you can do this in lots of ways. Linear gradients from top to bottom, add a diagonal like I did here, radial gradient just in the center or offset for a certain section like I did here. It varies by photo. But use those masks in Develop, play with the contrast and the light levels, and they will pop not just the light, but also the color, giving you a much more dramatic sunset without really playing with the colors or the saturation. Hope this has given you some good ideas, my friends. Check out my free ebook on Luminar Neo editing. It's a 27-page guide that you get at the link down below. I'll be back soon with more videos. You guys take care. Thanks for watching, hanging out. I'll be back soon. And until next time, my friends, adios.